Listen, let's talk let's talk about prisons then. I mean, there's two sort of strands to this story, really. Angela Rayner forcing through the planning process in order to build new prisons throughout the UK. Maybe she's finally listened to Robert Jenrick. He, of course, was the man that wanted to be the Tory leader. Let's have a listen and a reminder of what he had to say right here on Talk.
I want us to be building more prisons. The last government actually did build significantly more prison places than any prior Labour government. It built about 5,500 more than previous governments, but we need to build significantly more. I want us to have a prison building programme so we can lock up hyper-prolific offenders, the people responsible for most of the crimes that are affecting us in our daily lives, and keep them behind bars for longer.
Now, that's all reasonable stuff. Again, Steve, it's one of those things that, yeah, there's clearly people that should be in jail. If you are a, Mad Mick, the serial killer, who can't stop killing folk, then it's probably best you're kept on the inside somewhere. But, of course, the debate around this is accelerated somewhat by the lack of prison places and the fact that we are, despite releasing lots of prisoners, we are going to run out again.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? We release loads, and also no one gets arrested for anything these days. Like, you can shoplift willy-nilly. How are we managing to fill up those again? It's unbelievable. But prison in general, to try and work out if it's useful, it's got 4 or 5 roles depending on how you split it. There's the punishment by the deprivation of your liberty. That's the main one that everyone thinks of. There's the chance of being rehabilitated so you don't do it again. There's the threat to society, which is like, look what people get when they do this crime. Don't do this crime. Yeah. And the 4th one is you are keeping the streets safe when criminals are locked up. And the one that definitely works, that you can't argue, is that last one. If you are locked in a building, you can't do the same crime out there on the street. And that's the one that seems to be ignored the most. The one that definitely works is the one that is the first to be done away with. Like, oh, let's give you an ankle tag so we know where you are when you're doing your crimes. It's a bizarre way of looking at it. And the thing that I think we're getting wrong is that for people like us, well, for people like me, anyway, I'm not a criminal. I know where you grew up, so it's very difficult to try and predict your actions. But we don't want to go to prison. But criminals who've been to prison don't fear it the same. So if it's not a deterrent, if it's not fear, then I guess it's not working to keep criminals from being criminals, but it does keep the likes of us from doing it.
Well, if you're, what is often called sort of low-level crime, although I don't think it's really particularly low-level, certainly these days, if you end up with a custodial sentence, it's probably not really that low-level. It might just be that you're prolific or whatever the case is. But, yeah, if you think if I go on a massive shoplifting spree and, to the tune of thousands, if I get caught, I'm going to get 6 months, it's kind of worth it because I'm probably not going to get caught. And if I do get caught after doing it 20 times, I've made my money and I can stash that away, do my 6 months, which will probably be 3. Jobs are good and everything's fine.
Yeah, so you do need some other form of punishment and deterrent, don't you, for those type of people? Because this is what I mean. It stops. That's one of the main reasons I don't do crime. I don't want to go to prison. But I suppose after you've done a couple of short stretches, you realise it doesn't impact your life in the way that you thought it would, or it doesn't impact your life because you've got so used to the restrictions that it would put in place. If I had a criminal record, there'd be some jobs I couldn't get. Well, if you already got one, that's not going to change your life anymore. The idea of going back again won't change things. So, yeah, I mean, I'm very much saying more problems, but I'm not suggesting any solutions, because I don't know what it is. I mean, really, you have to solve it in that boring place right back at the start, like sorting out the class issues and the poverty issues. If you want fewer people to do crime, you need less incentive to do it. It won't stop it. Mad people are always going to be mad people, murderers are going to be murderers. Yeah. But you could address some crimes, but it's really boring. You got to just fix the nation.
Yeah. Do prisons work, or are there better alternatives? We're asking that question. A little bit of breaking news before we carry on. The father of Sara Sharif, the young girl murdered, as it's now been established. The father, Urfan Sharif, 42, stepmother, Beinash Batool, 30, have been found guilty at the Old Bailey of the 10-year-old's murder. Her uncle, Faisal Malik, was found guilty of causing or allowing death. And if you've read any of the disturbing reports of this, just the most devastating, horrific story of this young 10-year-old girl, Sara, who was 10 years old, killed, murdered by her father and her stepmother. They will be given very lengthy sentences. Sentencing won't be carried out today, but of course in the near future it will. And the uncle found guilty of causing or allowing her death. More on that as we get it. Stephen Allen is with us. We're looking through the big stories of the day. We've got some bad news coming up over Christmas, of course, Steve. We've got some strikes on the way. The RMT union announced strikes at Avanti West Coast Rail over Christmas, affecting services on the 22nd, 23rd and 29th. They properly rubbed it in. Now, let's remind us of Mick Lynch, of course. You know, he's about as senior and as well-known a union man as you can think. Before the election on Labour getting into government, said he was very positive about Starmer getting into power. Let's remind ourselves of what he said before Labour won the election.
I'm a realist. The only government we're going to get alternative will be led by Keir Starmer. So people have to deal with that. You know, people have got to grow up a bit in some senses.
Yeah, hasn't stopped the strikes though, Steve. On they go.
Yeah, nothing will. I wasn't even too surprised, in as much as whenever I have to travel by train, I always check to see if it's a strike day now. I think we all got acclimatised to it, didn't we? We've been through such a long period of strikes. Yeah. It's now one of the things you check. Check the weather, check the travel. Are there delays? Are there strikes? No, tick, tick, tick. Then let's try and leave the house. But the idea of doing it just to focus on hurting people seems dumb. What are you doing? You are losing goodwill. If you are calling a strike, and as I say, we're just so used to these are going to happen forever now. Surely you want to do things that impact the government or maybe business. They'd be the people that you should be taking aim at. There's one time of year when you won't impact government or business or anyone else other than actual people, and that's when people try and get home to Christmas. I mean, this is such a commonplace thing. Hallmark will start making Christmas movies about, you know, the strike before Christmas. It'll be some story of love on a train that didn't move, on a bus replacement service. Why attack us, though? It doesn't make any sense.
Indeed. I just thought it was rather interesting that we would, you know, genuinely, the vibe from union leaders, Mick Lynch included, was that, you know, as soon as Labour get in, because a lot of unions have done quite well, the £22 billion black hole, but half of that almost is in money given to unions who demanded extra cash. Now, that might be right, might be wrong, whatever you think about it, but that's where that money, that's how they arrived at that £22 billion figure. The very real sense that this stuff is now over is clearly nonsense, and they're carrying on. Mick Lynch urging Avanti to present serious proposals to resolve the dispute and achieve a fair deal. But ultimately, of course, that's about more money.
Yeah. And also, I'd say, read the room. There's a time and a place. The idea is that they're trying to catch up with what their pay should have been if we hadn't have been through a decade of austerity. Well, firstly, we did. Yeah. So the idea of rewriting history like some separate timeline, you've done a Back to the Future 2 on it, seems... Well, it's an aim. Should it be the goal? I don't know. But then trying to make sure that not only do you get paid for all the years that you should have been paid more and still get a healthier than inflation pay increase right now seems... Read the room. Like, everyone's suffering. These are the reason you had to not get that pay rise in the first time, austerity 1, was because people are suffering. Well, if we're suffering again, now do you think is the time for you to do well and everyone else to struggle? Yeah. Surely we should all be in it together.
Spot on. Interesting one comes at no name given. This should open up the debate to bring back capital punishment. This is relevant prison places for the most serious crimes. It would be a brilliant deterrent and also free up spaces in our prison. The problem is there's never any evidence that it's a deterrent. If you look at states in America where they have the death penalty, they have some of the highest rates of murder. So it doesn't work in that respect. And in any case, I mean, at the moment, if you murder someone, you stand the chance of getting 40 or 50 years in jail. I mean, frankly, if I was that person, I'd take the noose over the jail sentence. So I think there is a deterrent there, if that's how you look at it. But, of course, most murderers don't think they're going to get caught, like most criminals. So they don't even think about deterrence because, as far as they're concerned, they're going to get away with it. I also think that you have to sort of extend it beyond murder. Murder isn't our biggest contingent of prisoners taking up places are not murderers. The people that committed other crimes. Chris Dorr, the KC, will be on with us, who's very, very questioning of the prison system and how it's used. So we'll get a word from him in just a little bit. Stephen Allen is with us, looking through the big stories of the day, Steve. Let's move to this then. The MP speaking out against a proposed ban on first cousins being able to marry in Britain. He claims intermarriage can help build family bonds. Now, I already thought this was illegal. I didn't think you could marry your cousin, but Iqbal it's not Mahmood, it's Mohammed, there it is, it's quite easy to say now you say it, but spelt slightly differently. Iqbal Mohammed has spoken out on the proposals to ban first cousin marriage in the UK. Let's have a listen to what he said in the House of Commons yesterday.
We should try to step into the shoes of those who perhaps are not from the same culture as ours, to better understand why the practice continues to be so widespread. An estimated 35 to 50% of all sub-Saharan African populations either prefer or accept cousin marriages, and it is extremely common in the Middle East and in South Asia. I would therefore urge the House to vote against this motion and to find a more positive approach to addressing the issues that are caused by first cousin marriages.
There it is. I genuinely thought, Steve, that you were not allowed to do this, but apparently you can. Richard Holden, the MP we're going to speak to later, wants it banned, and there's an independent MP saying, no, it's a culture thing for some people. I'm not sure that's necessarily a reasonable riposte to this one.
No, even in the argument for what a weird sentence. The argument for first cousin marriage was that, as you say, builds family ties, family bonds. Also bonds between your fingers sometimes of skin, I believe that's one of the potential side effects.
An eye on your palm.
Yeah, and he says we should walk in their shoes as well. I imagine they're built up. But the issue that we're looking at here is it depends which culture you think it is, because normally if you talk about marrying your cousin and it can bring benefits, normally banjo playing is one of them. That's the kind of thing that we think of when you think of marrying your cousin. Yeah, no one checked to see if it was legal because we all thought it shouldn't be, in the same way that no one's checked to see whether you can marry your sister, because we know you can't, so we don't keep Googling it to see if it's okay. No, even in the argument to not ban it, he was saying that it brings with it health risks. Well, that's a good enough reason to ban it, isn't it? It's really trying to thinly slice the argument to say we shouldn't do it, but we shouldn't ban it. Well, if you shouldn't do it, why do you care if it's banned or not? That's what I look at this. I didn't notice whether it was banned or not because my cousins aren't that hot. So I never bothered Googling it. I just think it's something that we shouldn't do. So ban it. I don't care.
Yeah.
Unless you're really into your own cousin, you shouldn't mind if this gets banned.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, clearly it is a cultural thing, and, you know, I don't think it's a religious thing. I think it's cultural rather than religious, and there is a distinction between those two things. But and clearly in parts of the world over, you know, many decades and centuries, no one perhaps bothered to ask the health-based questions. But, you know, this is the UK. I think we are all wise enough now to be able to see that there are, in the worst cases, this can be a terrible result of a pregnancy of cousins marrying. It really is devastating. And I'm sure, you know, in other cases, nothing much happens and, you know, by a stroke of luck, you know, the baby turns out to be fine. But, I mean, that is a consideration. But curious that it's perfectly legal. Who knew?
Yeah, and he was saying that it shouldn't be the role, we should find other ways to educate cultures, and it shouldn't be the role of government to say who we can and can't marry. Firstly, it is the role of government to say who we can and can't marry. You can't marry your mum. And the idea that a test should be used. So let's check to see if there's a recessive gene that if you both have this recessive gene, if all you've got to play with is this recessive gene, you're going to have a child with a recessive gene-based issue.
Yes.
That would be the government saying who you can and can't marry. That would simply be moving the decision down to we've done the tests and you're not allowed to marry. So the argument that the government shouldn't do it, or the state rather shouldn't do it, is not valid. That is a role of the state, is to stop people marrying their siblings. Well, this is the same category. This is a recessive gene issue. It's not trying to be offensive to cultures, is it? This has not been brought up to say, I know what will show that culture. Let's ban this thing.
Absolutely.
Now we know enough about genes. That's why we should not do it.
And also, look, again, if it's a cultural thing, maybe I'm missing the point. But you don't tend to fancy your cousin, do you? Just to put it bluntly. I mean, it's like you don't. Your brain doesn't kind of go there because it's like your sister or your brother. These are your cousins. You wouldn't even consider that there might be. I'm sure there are. You know, there's doubtless one or two banjo-playing dodgepots out there that have given it a go over the years, even if they're not part of that culture. But nonetheless, I just sense you don't really need much of an education to be told don't marry your cousin.
That is interesting, isn't it? I totally agree. It feels innate. Now, maybe we're both missing the fact that we learned that from our culture so young that it feels innate.
Maybe.
But it feels primal, doesn't it? It feels biological, that you know there are certain people that your brain just tells you would be a really bad pair to breed with. And you'd be right. I mean, maybe it's cultural, but it is correct. You therefore fancy everyone else with whom there's a near zero chance of that same recessive gene issue, and you fancy them and you pursue them. I don't even fancy your cousin. That's
exactly.
how good at this I am.
Yeah, absolutely right. Whereas your nan's sister, absolutely fine. And what a looker old Maureen was. Let's have a little look at this then, Steve. Don't go there. Let's have a look at this to finish with. Brits brace themselves for more freezing weather. I love this. It's December. It's meant to be freezing. I hate it all soggy and rainy and it's been yucky. Brits are braced for more Baltic weather. Temperatures set to drop to -6 with freezing fog and snow forecast before Christmas. This is what it's all about, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, it's mainly the Daily Star, which is obsessed with talking about the weather. I mean, they've got their own weather page on page 2, but no, page 1 has to have it all the time, doesn't it? Yeah, you're right. These are really cold temperatures where we will probably see there's a chance of rain. There'll be cold temperatures at night. You won't get much daylight hours. The days aren't particularly long. I think the short word for it is winter. I'll give you that. But for some reason, I guess it pushes paper. People care about this stuff.
Yeah.
And normally, this time of year, you get 2 options, don't you? A really cold day when it might be sunny, but man, it'll be cold. Yeah. And you get a more mild day where you'll get rained on. To be fair, last week had a lot of rainy days that were equally as cold as the dry days.
They were very cold. They were very cold.
We can have a bit of a moan.
But you're right about you're right about the Daily Star thing, because when I saw this story, I looked on the official meteorological app, and then I went to another meteorological app, and there was no mention anywhere of -6. So I think they might have just sprinkled on a little bit of hyperbole in the weather department.
They never print a retraction or an apology, do they?
No, they never say, yesterday we announced that it was going to be -17. We would like to apologise for this because it was actually 28 degrees and sunny. Just a final one. This has just come in, Steve. Puberty blockers for under 18s with gender dysphoria will be banned indefinitely in the UK outside clinical trials. This is the Department of Health and Social Care. I think lots of people have campaigned for this. They'll be very happy to hear it. It might surprise some people that this has happened under Labour, who were very much, people were waiting to kind of think that they would green light this kind of stuff.
Yeah, although a while ago West Streeting was making noises that made you think this might be coming. But do you know what? It's Cast Review based, isn't it? Because the Cast Review didn't do the thing that many people have tried to pretend that it did. Yep. They didn't say, it's all lies, it's all wrong, there's no such thing as trans. No, the point from the Cast Review was so intelligent, it was great. If there is no evidence that this will do good, you don't do it.
Yeah.
That means you don't need to prove that it will do harm. You can spend all your time having that row, but until you can prove good from a medicine, you don't deploy the medicine. Yeah. And that's what's happening here. I mean, it's not the kind of angry headline that the newspapers want. It's not the hot take where you can get all shouty. But that is the wise piece of medicine that came out of the Cast Review. And that's, I guess, what's being used.
Indeed, 100%. Steve, thank you as ever. Steve N. Allen, the comedian and broadcaster with us on the programme.